stages.
Oh, well, thank you, Emily, for that introduction. And I'm just going to share my screen with some more slides. Hopefully people can see those. Emily?
Looks good. Yep.
Good. Okay, so part of the work that we're doing in the Living Shorelines project is to develop guidance for how to develop living shorelines approaches and apply them to the bay. And we have a large number of those. We have nearshore reefs, we have eelgrass plantings, we have beaches, and so on. But all of them have the same kind of basic characteristics of how do you take that idea of the approach of the living shorelines approach at a particular part of the shoreline, and then take them through to an implemented project. And always in projects, we have these different stages of design. We start off with a feasibility study, ideally then goes into conceptual design, and then increasingly detailed engineering design, and which also needs to get approved by regulators. And then that develops into a series of drawings and specifications to then put out to bid to a contractor. So that series of stages of design is really important. And as we were having early discussions about the guidance, we realized how important that is and how different people thought about these stages. Many agencies, staff, consultants, and practitioners, they define these stages differently. And currently we use both traditional grade projects and nature-based living shorelines projects. They vary considerably in the terms of how they define the stages, what level of information is included at each design stage, and the relationship between one stage and the next. And as living shoreline projects become less experimental and more mainstream, we need to be more consistent in this design process. We need to standardize the information needed and generated at each stage. And we need to be more consistent with the sequencing and the iteration that must be incorporated at each stage. Now, how does one stage feed onto the next? So in doing that, why is this important? Well, we need to understand that practitioners need to know how that information directly influences decisions that are made and the roles of the different partners and their responsibilities in making those decisions, and with what information. What's the level of risk associated with those decisions, and the data required to make those decisions. So what decisions, how are we going to make them, and who's going to make them? If the design process is unclear, or if there is difference if the confirmation or approval process isn't consistent, it can cause delays, can cause the need to do redesign because we've got to go back and make a better decision. And it can, obviously, that always leads to extra costs. And in the worst case scenario, it could lead to a project where the landowner is not fully on board and we need to change their mind of how they're participating in the project. Or it could be that there's insufficient budget or insufficient materials to complete the project at the end. So all of these are trying to reduce the risk related to project implementation. Sorry, skipped ahead one. So what we're doing in the guidance is we're creating a draft table of these different stages, and we're trying to incorporate everybody's kind of different ideas about how they look at things. Some of these discussions about the stage of design already exist within agencies or within consulting businesses. They're already a standard way of doing things. What we're trying to do is kind of like draw a crosswalk between the different groups who are working on this, so it gets some commonality between how we're dealing with these design stages, so that we avoid missing that key data and inputs. We avoid and we improve the communication between the different project partners and landowners and agencies and consultants, and we avoid the need to revise and redo design. And importantly, that we understand where the information is most appropriate to pass on to the regulators and how to incorporate the permitting process into this. So this large table, which we're going to share with you at the end of after this meeting with the notes, and we welcome your input and comments. With each of the stages, we're trying to define what the audience is, who we're writing the particular documentation for, what the purpose of that stage is, what its role is, what the level of information is going to be, because at the beginning we don't have very much information about the design, and that design gets more complete as the stages are gone through. And the same with the cost estimate. We start off with very wide range of the estimates, pluses and minuses of 50% or so, but then we gradually, as the design gets refined, as we become more certain about what the information is, then the cost estimate is also more refined. But we need to start early on with the cost estimate, because people applying for grants, people applying for funding, they need to give the funders and so on a heads up about how much they expect to be. And we're also trying to give some examples. First, a general example from the engineering and an agency's point of view. This is how generally they apply. And that may depend upon the different ways that the projects are contracted. And we also want to give a living shoreline example, a case study about how that would actually reflect in a living shoreline project, because they differ. The certainty and the need for how to explain to contractors the types of projects. These are new types of projects. So we need to think about how they actually apply to examples. And so we will be looking for you to comment on this after the meeting. And Marilyn, I'd like to ask you, do you have anything to add to that sort of general introduction?
Jeremy, I think that was fantastic, and just really getting across that we're excited to welcome discussion on this. Certainly recognize that different entities approach the design process and definition of those stages differently. And Jeremy mentioned our regional design and constructability guidance that's in process. That was a major topic at our first meeting in October, and the recording is available from that for anyone who may have missed that. But we're working with a core group of folks who've been engaged with building and constructing and monitoring living shorelines projects to develop that design and constructability guidance, and including definitions of living shorelines and this table to better describe the design process. So we really welcome working with all of you and getting input.
Thanks, Marilyn. I was going to step through now the different stages that we've got to so far, and these are just from discussions that we've had within the smaller group, just to give you an idea. Some of this, people may use these be very familiar with these stages of design, and it'd be great to hear their thoughts, particularly about how they see that fitting in. And other people may not have used these at all, which is great, because we also wanted people to understand what the processes are, so that people will know what types of interactions to expect at different stages through the process. So at the beginning, you have a feasibility study. You're starting off with an audience of all the different people who are involved in thinking about this area, including all the stakeholders and the public and the CEQA leads, and thinking about what are we trying to do, and what's our understanding of the present conditions that we have here, and what kind of approaches are appropriate to that area. Not every approach is appropriate to a particular location. What are our goals? What are our objectives? And develop that suite of feasible conceptual designs and some rough costs and sources of materials. If we don't have the money or we don't have the materials, we can't build the project. So really early on, thinking about those areas. And that came out as part of the discussions that we had, was that the need to really think through those almost some things which are the costs and the resources, which is often thought right at the end. Then moving through 10% conceptual design, thinking about getting everybody on the same page, developing the early plans for the projects that are generally feasible and meet the project goals, kind of narrowing into the actual concept that the team's going to work on. And then the preliminary design, which is kind of identify where things are, how many breaches there are, how many reefs there are, how much area of restoration there will be, and volumes of material, what's the kind of access and so on, defining the habitats that to be restored and protected, a description of the project, which can then be used in discussions with the regulators to get feedback that's going to be required at each stage, and providing that sufficient detail for discussions with regulators. Then moving on, there's a 60% design. And there's various ideas about when there should be what the interaction should be with the regulators. Very early discussions could be occurring very much at the feasibility or the conceptual design stage, getting those initial ideas. But the actual permit applications, many people felt was like about the 60% design. So it's a draft design. It's fully described the proposed siting, materials, and so on. It's worked out ideas, it's worked out some solutions to those early discussions from the regulators. And this is something for the permit application. And then the 90% design, that's really then taking that input back from the regulators to adapt the design and provide additional details to provide describe the work. When you're coming up to 100% final design, that's really now coming towards everything that incorporate required for the permit requirements. And then this is really putting together moving the project on from design into construction and looking for providing a documents that can be bid on by contractors. And then there's a series of, after the 100% design, these different types of drawings, the bid drawings that people would use for solicitation of the construction drawings and technical specifications, which incorporate any changes which have occurred during the bid process. And that's the reference for construction. And at this point, the Living Shorelines project and our discussions is there's a discussion about how, these are new types of projects. It's not always easy to communicate the design in standard engineering drawings, and there may be other ways to provide this information. And that's been part of that conversation. It'd be great to hear people's experiences with how you do an engineering drawing of an eelgrass bed. Apart from its areas, how do you explain the planting, and how do you explain some of the more biological elements? And also there's obviously a need to record at the end the final constructed projects for future reference, because all Living Shorelines projects are going to need significant monitoring. And so having a good understanding of what was actually constructed is really important. Just to give you a couple of slides on the last two slides on the takeaways we've had from the discussions. That permitting process, there isn't a fixed way at which stage consultation is initiated or applications are submitted. So I just try to capture here what people generally felt were the stages of design where permits and were discussed and submitted, and then where they were required, how they were incorporated into the design, the requirements incorporated into design. So again, these are draft guide. We're still drafting guidance. So your input today is really important. We want to get a nice wide understanding about how people use these stages of design. Key takeaways, also getting get early ideas on the construction costs, and also incorporating an understanding of how costs escalate over time. Projects take 5-8 years from start to finish, and those initial cost estimates can be quite wrong by the time you get, or quite widely out by the time you get to construction. So it's important to consider those potential cost increases. Engagement with landowners and land managers early on to have a role in design and permitting, and also understanding what longer term responsibilities are and the maintenance. So really understanding early on what the whole project will look like, and then thinking about where public outreach should occur. So we're lucky to have East Bay Regional Park District on our core design team, and they have a lot of experience with the public outreach and where best to incorporate that. And they have some best practices. So we're hoping to incorporate that kind of information into our work, learning from others how they've done them.